The North Smithfield Planning Board meeting for Thursday, April 11th has come to order at 6 p.m. We'll start with a roll call vote. Roll call, please. Dr. Benoit? Here. Dr. Roberts? Here. Mr. Porter? Here. Mr. Menard? Here. Ms. Marandola? Here. And Ms. Ramos? Here. And the chair is here. We have a full house in more ways than one. Next item, we're going to review and approve the minutes for the March 14th meeting. Give you a moment to take a look at those, make any comments or questions. Nope.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as submitted.
Second.
And we have a second. Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? No. The minutes are approved as presented. Item 4, disclosure. Any planning board members need to disclose any potential conflicts on the matters before the planning board this evening. Anything to disclose? Hearing none. Disclosure and notice. Any planning board members need to disclose any ex parte communications about any contested or material adjudicatory facts or opinions concerning the merits of any application before the board this evening. Again, hearing none. In that case, the declaration of the voting members, that would be, let's see, Dr. Benoit, Dr. Roberts, Mr. Porter, Mr. Menard, and myself. Okay. First item on the agenda, the public meeting, and it says public meeting. Mr. Planner, it says public meeting.
It's a public meeting, not a public hearing, Mr. Chairman, so
Gotcha.
the public is
Okay.
invited to attend.
Gotcha, thank you. So, public meeting for pre-application concept review, Pines Apartments, location 1204 Pound Hill Road, Assessor's Plat 7, Assessor Lot 95. The applicant is RPA Services LLP, its own residential REA, et cetera, et cetera. Would you like to give some background, please?
Mr. Chairman, this is a property that is known locally as the Pines. It was a banquet facility for a number of years and has been closed for a number of years. The applicant is here this evening under the new Low to Moderate Income Housing Act, which was passed last June 23rd and went into effect January 1st of this year. As part of that process, they've changed the levels of approval, eliminating the master plan approval, and applicants are allowed now to come in at the preliminary approval, at which point you would be required to have all your permits in hand. However, there is also a provision in the statute that allows applicants to come in for a pre-application to kind of get feedback from the board with regard to the project so they don't go off looking at permits and then come back to the planning board with a project that, the planning board hasn't really had any opportunity to participate in. The applicant has requested this pre-application meeting. It is really just to be an exchange of ideas for the applicant to present its project, planning board to ask questions, and the applicant will go off, take that input in, and start to put together a project for actual submission.
So this is really analogous to the master plan, except it's done prior to the application.
It's analogous to a master plan, except there's no vote by the board. There's no decision being made by the board.
Right.
It's just a simple exchange, a simple presentation by the applicant, a general conceptual plan. No engineering has been done, just to get feedback from the board.
Okay, thank you very much. So with that, I'll ask the applicant to start their presentation.
Ready? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is this on? On? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the record, my name is Kelly Morris Salvatore. I'm the attorney for this project. I have with me tonight Nick Piampiano, who's a professional engineer, and he will go through the conceptual design of this project. And also This is being proposed by RPA Services, and I do have the principal here, Richard Albanese, with us tonight. Thank you to Mr. Carullo. I was going to kind of introduce the project the same way. Because of the changes in the state law and the lack of a requirement for a master plan, we thought it would be best to come to you for a pre-app, because we don't want to come in with a proposal fully engineered, which, as you know, costs a lot of money, without having some input from the board. We are happy that there are neighbors here. I want to be clear that we respect the board's time. I know that you allocated about an hour tonight before you have to get into a workshop. We are happy to do one of two things: come back another night for another pre-app, or have a specific neighborhood meeting, because we do want to hear from the neighbors. We want to hear their concerns, and we want to address them in a reasonable manner. So however we can go through our summary, and then you can decide what you'd like to do going forward. But we want to be reasonable about this project, that we see that there's a lot of interested people here.
If I could just take the board's temperature on that, I think that's a great offer, but I think it would be better to do it as another pre-app meeting rather than separately without the board, right? That way we can all participate in the communication. Would you agree with that or not? Yes? No? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, I'm not happy that they took away master plan, because, they only took it away for comprehensive permit applications.
I think almost every applicant has gotten great value. We have gotten
Yeah.
great value out of all master plan conversations.
Right.
So I think it's a great thing that we're having this pre-app, because it's really going to provide the same kind of feedback.
Yep, thank you. So I want to start out, we see Facebook too, and I know that there's been a lot of comments, and I think there's some misinformation out there about what a comprehensive permit is all about. So I do want to take a few minutes just to describe what a comprehensive permit is and what it means for the community.
If I could, if I
yes.
add one thing, Mr. Elosi, throughout this, if you feel the need to interject to help explain things, that would be very much appreciated, because the rules have changed.
I will do that.
Thank you.
Yes, and there always has been a low and moderate income act that allowed for comprehensive permits. The act has changed as of July 1st, 2023, and what it changed was that there's no more master plan, and there's some other issues that I'm going to get into. But the low and moderate income, and when you talk about low and moderate income housing, it's also defined in the act as affordable housing. So those two terms are interchangeable. And LMI, or affordable housing, is intended to be rented or sold to individuals who are employed and have an income. In fact, in order to qualify to rent a one-bedroom affordable unit, an individual would have to make about $66,000 a year, and they'll pay in rent about $1,800 a month. For a two-bedroom, you're looking at an annual salary of about $73,000, and you'll pay about $2,000 a month in rent. And those are 2023 numbers. 2024, it did jump up a little bit, but I'm not confident in telling you those numbers, but it did jump up. I just got those today. So the individuals who are going to rent at this level are our children who are graduating from college with lots of debt, and our aging parents who are downsizing in order to have a decent retirement life. That's who you're going to see. It is not Section 8. Section 8 is a different program under the federal government, and you don't even have to have an income for Section 8. The government looks at what your income is from 0 to whatever, and then they base your rent on that, and they pay the rest. They subsidize it. So this is intended to be entry-type housing, rental or for sale. And we're looking at, for this project, the applicant is going to rent to people who have 80% medium income. And that's the numbers that I just gave to you, the $68,000 for a one-bedroom and the $2,000 for a two-bedroom. So that's what we're looking. So the people that are renting, they're teachers, they're nurses, they're fire and police, they're social workers, they're paraprofessionals, they're municipal employees. Those are the types of people that you're going to see renting these types of units. So I hope that clarifies what low and moderate income housing is under this law. There is Section 8, but that's not what we're proposing. So with regard to our application, the new state law provides for certain density bonuses when an application includes affordable units. So we are based on that law, we are proposing a development where 100% of the units, which essentially requires a minimum bonus density of 8 units per acre. So with this site being 7.5 acres, we have a base density of 3 units plus an additional 59. That gets us to the 62 units that are proposed. So the state law also says that this density bonus is a base. It's not a maximum. So we could request more units, and the site can accommodate more units, as you're going to hear from our engineer. We're also cognizant that the state law states that the area of the property that we can use for this base density bonus cannot include wetlands or wetland buffers. We do not have wetlands, but we have 2 acres of wetland buffers. So you can look at this 2 ways. One, we're asking for additional density of about 14 units above the base bonus allowed by state law in light of this wetland buffer. Or 2, we are asking for the amount of density under the state formula, which includes the wetlands. We're asking you to ignore that. The state law does allow you to include additional units over that base density, bonus density.
Could I
Yes.
ask for clarification on that? So you had what was it, 8 units per acre?
Bonus.
Okay, because is the acreage that you're allowed, the acreage that drives how many units you can put in based on the total acreage, or is it the acreage minus the unbuildable part?
So the unbuildable part is those wetland buffers.
Right, but I mean, but there's a number, so are we talking about 7.5 acres, or are we talking about 5.5 acres?
So-
That goes into the formula?
Right, so it's 5.5 acres as a base bonus density. The law specifically says that the bonus should be at least 8 units an acre. So we are basically asking for the 62 units, which is more than what that base density bonus is, but it can be accommodated on this site.
So the base would be 44,
46.
I'm sorry, 46?
Yes,
But you're asking for 62?
correct.
Okay,
Based on this site and as Nick's going to describe all that to you, that it can accommodate that type of, we're also looking at, so we're proposing 100% affordable. We'd be willing to talk about some reduction if that's an issue of how much density, if we could provide less than 100% affordable, like somewhere around 30%. So that's something that we can talk about. There's a lot of, alternatives that we can talk about.
Mr. Igliozzi? If you could, what would the rules be in terms of, like, does this, to meet the qualifications for the type of project, does it have to be 100% affordable? Or can it be less?
It can be less. They have a choice, but the bonus density changes depending on the percentage that they commit to affordable housing.
Okay,
They commit less, 50%, it's less bonus. They're proposing 100% right now, which gives them the maximum
Gotcha.
bonus starting point
Right.
of 8 units per usable acre. And that's why they're discussing what's usable
Yeah.
acre versus the buffer.
Yeah.
What did you say, it's 5 point?
Well, it's 7.5 acres, but then we have wetland buffers, not wetlands, but wetland buffers of about 2 acres, just
2
under
acres.
2
so it's
acres.
5.5, so,
Yeah.
okay, so if they were to reduce, if they want to have some that are not affordable, that's okay, but they have to reduce the overall number of units.
That's the starting point.
Okay,
What they're looking at the statute from the fact that if they propose 100%, they're entitled to an 8 units per
Okay.
acre bonus.
Okay.
Right, that's what That's what they're suggesting.
So
That's
look-
where they're at. But that's assuming now on 5.5 acres, that's why they're giving you the alternative. That
Okay.
would not equal 62,
Gotcha.
obviously.
Yeah,
So we'll look for Mr. Carullo and Ms. Monahan to keep their spreadsheet going based on the percentages, right? No, thank you. Sure.
It also mentions excluding land needed for infrastructure and right-of-way. Is that not apply in this property? I don't know exactly what they're defining as land needed for infrastructure, and if that would include things like the parking lot.
I think it does not include the parking lot. I think the parking lot would be part of the calculation, on a raw calculation for you got it, Mark?
So the LMI is both multifamily, single-family, and when it's talking about infrastructure and right-of-way, it's talking about if this was a conventional subdivision, they would have to deduct the rights-of-way for the streets and roadways. That would come out of the calculation, but in this particular development, because there is no public infrastructure right-of-way, there is no deduction for that.
right. Agreed. And then I just want to give you a little bit of information on the town of North Smithfield, and I see that Mr. Carullo has the Housing Works Fact Book from 2023. So as of 2023, you all know that you have to reach a goal of 10%, which is always going to be in flux, because you're always going to be adding market rate units, and then you're going to be adding LMI units. But as of 2023, you were at 7.8%, which is not bad, actually. So North Smithfield requires another approximately 120 units to reach that goal under today's build-out scenario. So we're proposing over half of those, which is not a bad thing, because now you're getting closer to your 10%. And when you get to your 10%, you no longer have to accept comprehensive permit applications. So that's kind of a bonus. If you like where this is situated with the 62 units, that's something to think about. So at this point, I'm going to have Mr. Piampiano describe the concept, including the site, the appropriateness of the density, considering that we will be constructing wells and septic to service the development. Thank you.
Hi, Nick Pampiano, professional engineer, advanced civil design, 88 Peeptoe Road, Situate. If we can we bring up the existing conditions plan? Oh, okay. Yeah, I can. Might be easier to see.
Mr. Papiano, while we're waiting on that, maybe you could just start talking about some of the
Sure.
highlights of the project?
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's not the survey plan, but I think either one, that's fine. As was previously stated, this is the old Pines Restaurant. I'm sure everybody's familiar with. 1204 Pound Hill Road. Assessor's Plat 7, Lot 95. The existing parcel contains roughly about 6.53 acres of land. There is a wetland. It's Trout Brook to the south. It kind of straddles the southern property line. That's why you see the shape of that southern property line, kind of irregular. Pretty much follows the stream edge. The stream, or the brook actually cuts across it in a small section. So most of the wetlands that are on the site are just the 150-foot wetland buffer associated with that, with a stream or a river. The rest of the site is all upland. The existing building contains is a footprint of over 4,000 to 5,000 square feet. There's an existing parking lot that's already paved and a driveway from Pound Hill Road. The existing parking lot contains about 129 parking spaces. The existing site, there's also been soil testing. There's an existing septic system for the restaurant, as well as a public well already on site. As far as what we're proposing to reuse the existing restaurant building for about 14 apartments split between 1 and 2 bedrooms, because that's what that building can accommodate. And then we're proposing 3 other structures, 2 smaller structures that'll each contain 12 units. Sure. Yep. Okay, so this is the proposed site. As you can see, unit number 1, that's actually at the top to the south. That's the existing building, which will contain the 14 units. Building 2 is just to the right. That'll have 24 units, and then buildings 3 and 4 will have each have 12 apiece, for a total of 62. We had a preliminary meeting with Rhode Island DEM just to discuss the project. They looked at possible issues with septic and wetlands. What we're proposing that you can see here is we're going to stay completely out of the wetland buffer. There was a suggestion that there's a parking lot to the south behind the existing building. They might want that removed, so we would agree to go in with a possible wetland application and remove that pavement and then restore it back to its natural state. We don't need that parking for the proposed development. And also, I'd just like to bring up that previous soil testing has been done at the site. We have really good soils, sand and gravel. Water tables were not reached down to 8 and 10 feet. And this was pretty much all over the upland portion of the site that you see developed. So conceptually, what we're proposing now are these 4 buildings with actually 4 wells. DEM thought that we should look at keeping the public well, so we will, if this project does move forward, we'll look at that as a possibility. And then we would have probably 5 smaller septic systems for the entire development, just breaking up with whatever works for gravity. So there was some issue that DEM brought up that we'd have to look at possible nitrogen loading at the property line, and so there might be some pretreatment depending on how many units and the breakdown of the 1 and 2 bedrooms. So that's something, just going forward, we'd be looking at, but right now this plan is pretty conceptual. We're proposing to kind of reuse and redevelop the existing driveway. So all the parking that you see is located just about within the footprint of the existing parking lot that's out there now. And just as of note, conceptually, we show a possible sand filter for drainage, water quality treatment. We know we'll have to meet all the state standards and DEM standards for drainage, and this is preliminary, but we just kind of carved out a little space. So that's pretty much the overview.
I just want to add one more thing. Sure. One of the requirements of the new law is that the town cannot require any more than 1 space per dwelling unit for up to 2 bedroom units. If we had 3 bedroom units, which we're not proposing, you could apply your zoning requirement. We are proposing 117 parking spaces, which again, some communities like more than less. We're only required to have 62. So that's just something that I want the board to understand as well. Thank you.
Yes, it's actually 116 right now. We have some flexibility of adding a little more or subtracting, but we thought that that was a pretty good number with overflow parking and not too much parking. So we're just trying to strike a happy medium with that.
Okay, Dr. Bryant?
Have you considered the history of the area and what activities had taken place within perhaps a half-mile radius?
I heard there was some issues, possibly, of contamination for wells. There's nothing that we found that was actually on this site. Going forward, we would have to look into that. Having a public well on site, I'm sure this well was tested on a regular basis for years.
The success of the project is going to depend on potable water. And I would urge you to get a Phase 1 environmental study at the very earliest moment so that you know you're going to achieve your objective.
Sure.
Thank you.
I have one question. What is the planned configuration of these units? If I did my math right, they average to about 550 square foot per unit. Is that accurate today?
Yeah, that's pretty close. I think we're between 500 and 600. The existing building, the units might be a little bit larger because there's some irregular configurations inside to make things work. But typically for the new ones, that's roughly around the size.
So they primarily or entirely one-bedroom units?
There's going to be a mix. We just don't know what that is yet. We haven't really got there yet. But they will be between 1 and 2 bedrooms.
At 550 square feet?
That number too is subject to a little bit of change. I think, I think depending on the size of the units, the range would be probably between 500 and let's say 850 max.
Dr. Benoit?
This is going to a duplication of your previous comment, but just to reassure the audience, there will be no encroachment on the buffer zones. You would just use it in a calculation for density. Is that correct?
Exactly, and we're actually going to propose to DEM a restoration of the disturbance that's already within that buffer. They were pretty favorable to that, so we thought we'd take the extra step and go and get a wetlands permit and actually remove that pavement within the buffer.
Are the... Oh. Actually, this is not a public hearing. For a pre-application or previously for master plan, those were not public hearings, but they're purely informational. It's a conceptual conversation with the board, as they stated earlier, to make sure they're on the right track or not, so that... So, right,
Cemetery's not on the property.
so when questions you have, if you're not recognized by the board, then you need to keep it, okay? It's our time to ask questions. And you will have a time to ask questions at the next meeting, and you should list all those. List them down, please bring them, we appreciate them. But for tonight's meeting, these are mostly about the board, engineering and safety issues and all that kind of stuff. What was that? So, I had a question. Are the buffer zones marked on that drawing?
There are. There's one 150-foot buffer zone. It is shown on the drawing.
Is that the gray area up above the pond?
It's actually
Oh.
jurisdictional. That's the buffer zones. The one closest to the river is the buffer zone, which is 150 feet. And then there's 2 lines on the plan. The second one that's closer to the development, that's just the Rhode Island DEM jurisdictional line.
Okay.
So there's a 150-foot line and a 200-foot line. We're actually going to stay out of even the 200-foot right now.
So what types of consideration have been done for, obviously, I mean, the Pines is a very, very popular restaurant. I've been to it many times. But other than for functions, you know, they didn't have the kind of daily traffic that you're talking about. So what kind of considerations have been done for having, you know, if you have 62 units, some mixtures, you're going to have at least, let's say, 80 to 85 people with automobiles going to and from work every day.
Sure.
And other things. What kind of consideration have been done for the traffic flow?
Yeah, we are purely conceptual right now. We anticipate that at preliminary that, you know, we would get a traffic study done. We'd look at whatever the existing conditions are. This will add so many trips in the peak hour in the morning, in the afternoon, and they'll be adjusted on the basis that their directional distribution that it is right now, and we'd have to look at that. So at this point, we don't have that done, but we anticipate that, you know, that's a question that the board and the neighbors are going to want to know what the impacts are on traffic, and that we plan on addressing that in the future.
Thanks. Is it on right now? I'm just building on what Dr. Benoit was asking about the water testing, and I wanted to say that not only am I concerned about the baseline water testing, but if you're putting in the additional wells and then trying additional water, do you have a way of modeling what would happen with that Superfund site? Because my understanding is that the plume is moving, and it's not determined where and how it will move. And my understanding is that when wells are dug and more water is drawn, it can change the way other groundwater behaves. So I'm curious if there's a way like that EPA can advise you on what could potentially happen with additional wells in that area.
Yeah, we can look at that. We're not fully set on going with the additional wells yet. We might just keep the existing public well and use that for the whole facility. So it's possible that we don't drill any new wells and just utilize the existing. So we're going to look into that. We'll see what the yield is on that well. We'll see, you know, the testing, make sure there is no contamination there, because that well was a public well and tested for years, so there are records of that. We'll do some research, and DM was kind of leading us down the road of actually looking at possibly keeping that public well for the site. So we'll look at that.
Okay. Mr. Porter?
One thing that I would like to see happen as well is a discussion with the fire chief for fire suppression. How are you going to be treating these particular 4 buildings? If you're going to be putting a cistern on site and keeping that underground, or, you know, other methods of fire suppression. That would be one thing I'd like to see happen. We've already mentioned talking about traffic study to see the impact of the neighboring roads. I'm also curious, at one point, one of you had said you were looking at either renting or selling, so I was just curious if there had been a renting? Okay.
Yeah, renting is proposed.
Okay. So there would be an application process for the potential renters to be going through?
So with low and moderate income housing units, we would have to engage a monitoring agent.
Okay.
And they kind of take care of all that to make sure that the applicants for rent meet the qualifications, and that happens for the entire 30-year period.
Okay. So could you explain what that application process is like?
Well,
What-
I'm not a monitoring agent,
Well, yeah.
so we can be prepared to talk about that at the next meeting.
Okay.
Yep.
I think that would be good to get an understanding of how you're assessing potential applicants. I know you gave the income rates and everything like that, but if there were other,
Yeah.
you know.
And I want to be clear, those are rates that are on the Rhode Island Housing website that I pulled off the web. It's their 2023 rates, and I just saw new rates that I wasn't comfortable providing to you, but they were even higher.
Okay. No, that's good to know, though. And then at one point, there was mention that you could go for an increase, and I know you said that you guys were going to touch on the number of units one way or the other. If we were to theoretically, if we were to max out the site, what number would we be looking at?
Our max is 62. I mean, you know, my client would love to have 100,
Okay.
but we understand, you know, the site can accommodate 62 units.
Okay.
Fairly.
Okay.
So it only goes down if you choose to not have all of them be LMI.
Yeah, I mean, we want to
Okay.
be good neighbors. You know, we're talking about parking issues, density, the fact that my client has to provide 100% affordable, which he loses on, but perhaps the town feels that they lose if it's 100%. That's something that we can have a conversation about.
Okay. No, that's all I had.
Dr. Benoit?
In regards to the existing well, it is considered a public well. It has served a restaurant. But the Department of Health has regulations stating that you have to have a 500-foot radius, I believe, for a public well, and you're proposing 4 new on-site wastewater treatment systems, which would be infringing on that 500-foot radius. Are you sure you want to continue with the public well?
Well, that's one of the bigger questions. It is 500 foot is the jurisdiction. They will allow septics, but it's a case-by-case basis. So they're going to look at our development. There already is one actually closer to that public well that we'd be willing to probably abandon and put them further away. So that's kind of where we're so early in the process. It's a very good point, but that's something that we would have to work out between Rhode Island DEM and the Department of Health and see what's the best fit for everybody. So that's why I'm DEM was pushing for the public well. We haven't talked to Department of Health yet, so we'll see how they feel, get their input, and that's why I say at this point, we showed 4 new wells. Could it be we reuse that existing well? Yes, maybe, but I really don't know yet. We're going to evaluate that and make the best decision.
Mr. Menard?
So just a quick question, that if they're going to be LMI units, is there anything as a deeded document that these units could never be of a Section 8 type of occupancy? A guarantee to the town that they would never flip over? Just because this area is a rural area, it's a single-family area. I'm not against Section 8, there's a place for it. This is not. I just want a guarantee on that.
This is not Section 8 housing.
I understand that, you made that. I'm asking the question, is there a guarantee that it could never become Section 8?
I can look into that in terms of some kind of a restriction, but this will be monitored by a monitoring agent for 30 years, where the occupants must have an income, they must qualify for the rental that's required at that given time during those 30 years. So the answer is, we will look into it. I'm sure that there could be a restriction put on or something like that. We could work with the attorney, Mr. Igliosi on that.
Thank you.
Just looking at your dimensional requirements breakdown on this upper corner, I'm just curious about the maximum lot coverage. We're required at 20%, but I didn't know if you had a percentage based off of what you're proposing tonight.
I can definitely get that to you.
Okay.
I would imagine that it's, just looking at, it is existing and a redevelopment, but I would say it's probably around the 40% range or 35.
Okay.
Well, and to be clear, with a comprehensive, I know some of you, I've seen some of you before. So have you had comprehensive permit applications recently?
This would be the first.
Not really? So with a comprehensive permit, the zoning regulations have to be waived to get that kind of density. So that would be sort of a waiver in terms, if it's over 20%, that's allowed under a comprehensive permit application.
Okay. Mr. Cruel and Mr. Igliosi, maybe you can clarify on this. I understood that it said there would be reasonable waivers, not just if somebody's coming in and the maximum lot coverage is 20%, and then we have an applicant that comes in for 80%. That's somewhat unreasonable to me. I thought the law was written in such a way that it was a little subjective and not very clear, which we don't like, but,
Waivers will be considered by the board in due course when they're presented and they're demonstrated to be justifiable. But the
Okay.
board will make a decision on those waivers as they're presented. You can't do that in a vacuum.
right, okay.
I've seen some applications that will literally have 24 waivers from various zoning requirements. You know, your example that 80% might be too much, may be the case, but if we're only seeking one waiver, and we're not proposing 80%. So you really have to balance the need for affordable housing, that's what the state law requires, and the waivers that we're requesting.
So I have a question on, the actual construction, looking at where the buildings are going to lie versus the satellite photo. Of course, everyone knows it's a highly treed lot. I
Yes.
think it is good. I'll give you credit for using the existing parking and not expanding on that, maybe making it a little prettier. But what about the three buildings that would cut into the small forested areas, I'll call them, those bottom three buildings, and the impact on the neighbors and on visibility and
Sure.
that. So,
Yeah, the site's kind of tucked away. The two most northerly ones, these two, we're going to be kind of cutting into the slope there. So those actually, they won't sit up high. They'll be at the same elevation as, the front door will be at the same elevation as the parking lot. So they're not going to sit up high. So from the roadway, you might just see the roof of one of them.
well, I'm not just thinking the roof from the roadway. I'm thinking from actual neighbors.
Yeah.
There's one right on. Well, I guess there's two of them with driveways. One of them is very close to the northernmost building.
Yeah, this one right here.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the other one, in the southernmost.
Yeah, the southern one, okay, that slopes down. That's going to be a walkout building. So it's not going to be that tall, even though it's a two-story building. One
Okay.
story will kind of be into the ground for a full walkout in the back. So that one won't sit very high.
So talk about the northernmost one.
So the northernmost one, both of those will be cut in to those notches that you see there. So the grades actually go up from where the parking lot is back up to the north. So those are going to be cut into the slope.
So the house, the existing dwelling, that's the one that's kind of L-shaped. Are you saying that is, because I can't read it from the lines, that is higher elevation than the northernmost building?
Well, I don't really have contours on there. I would assume they're higher than the parking lot.
I don't know that they are.
Well, the parking lot drops down from the back of the property, probably about 18 feet.
Yeah.
So I would assume that their elevation is somewhere between the 18, but not as low as the parking lot.
Right. But I'm just concerned because that's the tightest point. That's the tightest point between what you're proposing and an actual residence property, dwelling, okay?
Yep.
So I guess I'll say, we can't, you'll have to put things together for preliminary, but the buffering and again, because of the nature of our town, keeping people's sense of being in a rural environment and not having to look at something they don't want. Now, granted, it's not an industrial building, so even the look of the building is going to matter a lot to us because we want it to look like a nice quality residential building, like all the homes around it. But still, they may want, and I'll say, often we ask for evergreen buffering so that it what's that?
They call for it. The green
Okay,
that you see.
yeah, I do see some evergreen buffering, but that's going to be a key consideration, is buffering both for visibility and for noise.
Yeah, we'll take a look at those two
Okay.
buildings in particular.
Mr. Chairman, sorry. Perhaps what could also be helpful is a site section, just to understand the contours, the height of these buildings, I think that could be done pretty quickly, so we can get an understanding of, what the effects are, whether it be a north, include north-south, east-west sections. I think that would be very helpful to understand how we'd be seeing these from other parts of the neighborhood.
Yeah, if you could have that for the next meeting, I think that'd be very helpful. Again, we're not talking about engineering drawings, but as you said, site sections, because it's one thing to be taking the bird's eye view, but what matters, I think, a lot to people, even more so, is the view from their house.
Yeah, we'll take a look at that.
Okay.
I think you also want to be in serious consideration of where it would be used, if anything's going to be proposed for parking lot lighting. It's a pretty open area to some of the abutters, that right now, it's dark, and even dark compliant lighting will still give some illumination to that area, so it really has to have some serious consideration for that, not to affect neighbors.
Okay.
Clarifying question about the wetlands buffer, which I think you said once already, so sorry if I'm asking again. Did you say that the 2.5 acres are pretty much near the river or the creek, the brook?
Yeah, so the brook is the actual wetland. The buffer is 150 feet off that into the property. It's upland area, but it is buffer. So it's not
Okay.
it's not actually wetland
Right.
habitat, but that's the buffer that we want to stay out of and that
Okay.
DM has jurisdiction over.
And that's the only part of that whole parcel that has a wetlands buffer is the one along Trout
Exactly.
Brook? Okay.
So the only work that we're proposing to do in there would be to actually remove existing parking areas that are in there and restore them back.
Okay. Dr. Benoit?
At your next presentation, not the community group, but to us, would you have a landscape architect presentation prepared at that point?
I think that's
We'll talk to the client, but, we really want to get your input on before, because all we have to submit is this preliminary plan. So we really want to understand what you want, and then we'll file a complete submission. I'm not saying no, but we're at the very beginning stages of this.
Right.
No, I'm suggesting at the preliminary, you should have.
Oh, absolutely.
I trust you
Oh,
will
at
have
preliminary,
a landscape
yes.
architect.
I thought you meant our next
No,
pre-app.
no,
I'm
no.
sorry.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Ariana? Ms. Ramos?
So at the next hearing, would we be able to also have the Phase 1 environmental study? When would that come in?
I think that would be preliminary.
I don't know. I'm not sure we're going to do a full phase 1 environmental. We will explore the well situation and see if there's anything there. A study like that would take time. I think when the owner bought it, I didn't know if you had any studies done or investigations, but
Mr. Carullo, can you clarify if there's a requirement, a preliminary, or?
Well, there's no requirement for it, so, but at preliminary, the board can attach stipulations based on, what they believe is appropriate. We can, as staff, I will be having conversations with the attorney and the applicant about, I'm taking notes here, about conversations that we'll need to have moving forward, and it'll be up to, staff and the applicant to come to some sort of understanding as to what is going to be necessary to be submitted for the board to be able to perform an adequate review to make a decision. So, those conversations will be ongoing. And at the end of the day, if the board is unhappy with something that comes before them at preliminary, there's no requirement to approve the preliminary at that point. The board could simply request, if necessary, additional studies that they deem appropriate that are related to the development and the approval of the development prior to issuing a preliminary approval. The attorney is a very experienced attorney. I think we'd be able to, I mean, I don't want to speak ahead of any submission, but I think we can all understand, based on this testimony and based on information that would be coming from a neighborhood meeting, when the residents will be able to speak directly with the applicant, the engineer, and the attorney to give them their concerns. I would be intending, if they were having that meeting, I could attend the meeting. I would not participate in the meeting, but I would be there to take notes and to listen, and to use, judgment as to what are valid concerns.
Okay. Mr. Igliozzi, if we hold as you call it, the neighborhood meeting, I think it would be important for at least some planning board members to also be in attendance, but we don't have to do it as a planning board meeting. What would be the rules around that to make sure that we don't violate any open meeting laws?
Well, the applicant is offering to take public comment, that's obviously not the official public hearing, at another pre-app meeting. But if the board doesn't want to supervise that meeting, then there's no prohibition against board members going to a public meeting, as long as the board members are not discussing among
Right.
themselves. Oh, what do you think? And coming to some conclusions. You could all sit there as long as you're all not talking about or agreeing on any point that's being discussed. So
Right.
I think the board should just wrestle with, while the public's here and the applicant's here, do you want to have another, because this process is new, and usually there is a master plan that has a public informational component that
Right.
no longer exists, do you want to construct, which you would not be allowed to do but for the applicant's agreement, another pre-app meeting and allow public comment? Now, the public should understand that public comment at that meeting is not the public hearing,
Right.
but it
Understood.
would be an opportunity in advance of the plans for everybody to comment. So that can be done in one or two ways. Either another pre-app meeting like this, where they get to put public comment with what little information we have, or they have a private meeting, a private public meeting outside of this building
Right.
with the applicant, and the boards can attend. But the applicant has a suggestion, I'm saying.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, so I agree with what Mr. Igliozzi said. We're happy to come back because we want as much information as possible so that we can properly prepare for a preliminary plan. We're happy to come back for another pre-app and take comments from the public. I'm going to ask at the end of this meeting that Mr. Johnson put my letter up with my email, because you've asked a couple questions that I can't answer tonight. So I'd love to have questions from the public that I can be prepared to answer at the next pre-application meeting. So I think if we don't have to have meeting after meeting, but if we have another pre-app where you accept comments, and before that, the public can send us questions and we can be prepared to answer those, I think that would be an efficient way
Yep.
of handling it.
That's fine. Yeah, I was going to also say to the public that certainly sending, because I know many of you have questions, we're obviously, and want to take them, keep track of them, but there's nothing wrong with submitting them now via email. All of our email addresses are available. That's a very generous offer on yours. Be prepared for your inbox to have a little jump in activity.
Yeah.
But I think that's healthy. It's a good thing. And I'll just say to all of you, we see a lot of projects. That's the first time I've seen an applicant's attorney offer their email out. So use the power for good. But I think that would be important. So, but speaking to your point, Mr. Igliozzi, I think it would be important to get the board's opinion and make a decision, yea or nay, on whether it's a private public meeting, a town meeting, or neighborhood meeting rather, versus an actual planning meeting, pre-application planning meeting with the planning, as a planning meeting, so. Any
I know.
opinions on that?
For me, it would be great to hear what everybody's thinking. So if we could have that be a continuation of the pre-app meeting, then that way everybody's comments can be put on record. We can have the meeting minutes of it. Be prepared to say your name, address, and questions. And I think that would be the best way to get this rolling.
And we could dedicate more time to it,
And
too.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I am offering my email address. I just want people to know I'm not going to be able to respond to, every question, but we will be prepared when we come back
Right.
to answer all of the questions. And I
Absolutely.
think that's an efficient way of handling it.
Yep, I do too. Any other comments on as Mr. Porter put it, the continuation of this, essentially of this meeting where it is a formal planning board meeting, but with public comment? Yes?
That's my preference.
Is there?
Yeah.
Ms. Menard? We're all in agreement on that, so I would say that would be the right thing to do. Now, whether you, I don't know what the process is, Mr. Cruill, do we do that as
Well,
a
the process,
continuation of this meeting?
Mr. Chairman, I would say you'd want to continue this meeting
Okay,
formally to the May 9th meeting, so that everyone here is aware, 7 PM, May 9th would be the next available planning board meeting.
okay,
You would make that announcement, you would vote, and there'd be a continuation of this to that meeting. Everyone here can understand that.
okay. So
That
I
would
need a
be, I
motion.
think that's appropriate.
So I would need a motion for that.
I thought we didn't have to make any motions this evening.
Well, you know,
Not to
I don't mean to take issue, in this particular case, we're not continuing a public hearing, so
Oh.
I think we should establish the new date, because everybody is here, so they're aware.
Oh, okay.
It's still gonna be posted, it's still gonna be, not advertised, but posted, but if you all can be in agreement that a majority of the members are available on May 9th, then I suggest that you just designate that May 9th will be the next pre-app.
I saw 7 nodding heads, so I
And
think
if
we're
that's a
good.
date that's good for the applicant,
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that's a good date, and I'm also going to offer, if you want to start at 6, I don't know what your docket's like that night, but that's up to you.
6
Well, there's a lot
o'clock
of
works
people
for
here,
me,
so
you know?
Time to be
that's up
determined.
to you. I just see a
6
lot of people
o'clock
here,
good for
so.
everyone?
Well, it's gonna be the only thing on the docket that we really need to decide at 6.
there will be one other item on the docket.
Yeah. So,
Can we just say to be determined, but definitely May 9th? Okay,
that would be my advice.
all right.
Okay.
So
You may
stay,
want the other item on the docket, if that can be done within an hour, to do that first.
yeah, we could always do that first. Yep,
So maybe you just identify the two items by time on the docket.
sure.
okay. We can do that.
You can
Great.
get a feel for that speed.
So everybody mark May 9th in your calendars, right?
And again, Mr. Chairman, that is my email address, so we'd love to be prepared to answer questions that you have.
Okay. And
And, Mark, we have this on the town website as part of the meeting materials, so if people don't take a picture of Ms. Salvatore's email right tonight, that's where they can go back and find it.
right,
Okay.
all right.
Yeah.
So with that, we're good. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Thank all of you for attending. We look forward to hearing your questions and comments on May 9th. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, make a motion with recess until 7 PM for a meeting with the zoning board.
Oh, I got a question for
I'd like
Mark.
to go until 7:10. I'd like to go until 7:10. So we have a motion, board, we have a